In a world where fantasy football has taken over the land, two unlikely heroes will arise. They call themselves the Fantasy Football Apocalypse. But who are they?
Trent and Jeremy. Trent and Jeremy. Trent and Jeremy. Trent and Jeremy. Trent and Jeremy, yes, they are the boys. When it comes to fantasy advice, they got the noise. One's a little loud, and he's far from cautious. His voice alone will turn your stomach nauseous. MC number 2, well, it's just not that simple. Some would even question that he's borderline mental. These two combined will try to be funny, but their main goal is to try to make you money, 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 money.
Oh, yes! It is time once again for the Fantasy Football Apocalypse. I am Trent Scott. Actually, for the first time, sitting in the same room as Jeremy Scott. What's up, man?
I don't know. It looks like you need a shower. It looks like... I don't like this as much.
Yeah, it was a rough night last night watching Monday Night Football.
Oh, this is going to be a fun podcast. It was a very weird week for fantasy, but a lot of insight. Overreaction Monday was definitely overreaction, but we'll see what happens from here.
Yeah, so before we get into this week's picks, let's take a quick look back at last week, where your boy, Trent, got the Week 1 victory over Jeremy.
Let's just get to the new material.
71-61, a couple of highlights. I picked Marcus Mariota as my quarterback, and he happened to score 24 points in his first career game, so I think that was a pretty good pick, Jeremy.
Yeah, beginner's luck. Also, can we just talk about how bad Jameis Winston has looked?
Yeah.
He looked horrible. I truly, everybody knows I can't stand him, but I genuinely felt bad for him because he looked awful.
First pass was a pick six. So definitely room for improvement on Jameis Winston's side. But as far as last week's picks, I would say the disappointment of the week, Jeremy, you picked Nelson Aguilar. He scored 1 point last night for the Eagles.
Yeah. It's kind of inexplicable, to be honest, but especially with Bradford throwing over 50 times. I personally don't understand. I don't think it's time to freak out yet, but I would let him prove it a little bit before we started going for him again. So that's kind of my thought process. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started, Trent.
All right, so to the victor goes the spoil. So I've got the first pick this week at quarterback. And why not do it again? It worked out so well the first time. My quarterback this week, once again, will be Marcus Mariota. Of course, the 4 first-half touchdowns last week. Got another just juicy matchup this week, taking on the Cleveland Browns. Now, I'm not saying Mariota is going to throw another 4 touchdowns, but there's no reason to think he can't put up at least 18 points this week.
I'm not sure if it was a mix of quality skill and beginner's luck, I think. Mariota looked good. Now, the Buccaneers' defense is probably the worst in the league as well, so that's something to take into consideration, but it's not like he had 2 touchdowns and 250 yards. He dominated. He didn't even play the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
So, Browns' defense is pretty awful. I kind of like it. I think I'll be picking Mariota in FanDuel this week.
All right, so Jeremy, who's going to be your quarterback this week?
The quarterback that I have selected is Carson Palmer. He lit it up last week. He looked good. He had, 25 points or something? This next week, they got another juicy matchup. They're playing the Bears, which we saw, obviously, Aaron Rodgers had a very good week against them.
But that was Aaron Rodgers.
Yes, but still. Michael Floyd's back, John Brown. Also Ellington going down. I'm pretty sure they're going to be passing the ball a lot. It's not like the Bears have a lot to stop them. So I like Carson Palmer this week. I think he's a cheap FanDuel pickup.
Yeah, I agree. He will be cheap. I
What was that?
I don't know how effective he will be, though. The Bears don't have a great defense. I just think that there's other options out there that are better than Palmer. It's not 2005 anymore. He's not a top 10 quarterback anymore. So while I don't think Palmer's necessarily a bad selection, I just think that there's better selections available than Palmer.
Like who?
Marcus Mariota, for one.
Play the matchups, Trent. All right, moving on to running back now. Trent, give us your running back.
So my first running back this week He played in his first career game last week. He did okay, 51 yards rushing, 16 yards receiving. He only had 15 touches, so over 4 yards a touch. But T.J. Yeldon for the Jacksonville Jaguars gets a very intriguing matchup this week because the Jaguars take on the Miami Dolphins, who gave up 121 yards to Alfred Morris last week. It's pretty clear Yeldon is the lead back in Jacksonville. Denard Robinson will probably get 7 or 8 touches, but Yeldon should be in line for around 20 touches this week. So I could definitely see him approaching 100 yards and a touchdown.
I don't particularly like Yeldon because he got 12 carries, which to me that doesn't sound like the lead back. I mean, sure, he had the most carries, but I don't like the confidence they had there. There's always the possibility that the Jaguars are going to be down big, which that's not even really a possibility. It's more of a probability.
Because the Dolphins looked so great last week against the Redskins.
We'll do a side wager after the show, but Alfred Morris is also, the guy. He's experienced. I'm sorry, T.J. Yeldon is not getting past Ndamukong Suh. Do not pick T.J. Yeldon.
All right, well, Jeremy, you're saying don't pick T.J. Yeldon. Who are you saying to pick?
All right, Trent, the running back I'm picking is a guy you picked last week and passed on this week. I'm going with Chris Ivory. Obviously, he is the bell cow. He got over 20 carries. He had over 20 fantasy points. He's going to keep finding the end zone. And I believe I can quote you saying he's going to have 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns this year.
That's right. I am all in on Chris Ivory. I have 5 fantasy teams. I own him on 4 of them. I really, really buy Chris Ivory as a major player fantasy-wise this year. I think he's going to finish the season as a top 10 running back. I just don't buy the matchup this week. He's going up against the Indianapolis Colts, who played the Bills last week, and they absolutely shut down LaShawn McCoy, LaShawn McCoy is a former rushing champion. He's a much more established player than Chris Ivory. So I just don't like the matchup, but season long, I am all in on Chris Ivory.
Well, we'll see what happens. Trent, give us your last running back.
So my other running back, another rookie who played in his first game last week, Amir Abdullah for the Detroit Lions. He outtouched Joique Bell. That was really the major concern, was going to be to see how that backfield timeshare worked out, and it was in favor of Abdullah last week. He scored a 24-yard touchdown on his very first carry. And so I like the kid in Detroit. They're going up against the Vikings, who got shredded by Carlos Hyde last night for almost 170 yards. So give me Amir Abdullah.
Yeah, well, not necessarily. Yeah, the matchup I can agree with, but the fact that he had 7 carries I don't like. The catch, obviously, the passing game is what he's going to be more utilized. It's high risk, high reward, and typically I don't like to deal with guys like that because it seems like more often than not they underachieve as opposed to do what you hope they do. That's why I'm out on him. But if you need a cheap guy in FanDuel, he's a great pickup, or he's a great flex start as well.
All right, so Jeremy, you picked your first running back was a running back I picked last week. I think your second running back is a running back you picked last week.
Absolutely. I'm just going to ride them while they're hot. No, going with Rashad Jennings again. He had 11 points, which is, not terrible. Honestly,
not great either.
Well, if you get double digits from your players, you're more than likely going to win. Regardless, before you rudely interrupted me, the Giants really did not have a lot of offensive possession time last week. Cowboys ate up virtually the entire first quarter. What I really like about Rashad Jennings is Tom Coughlin's confidence in him in the red zone. They had him in at the end of the game. Obviously, there's the controversy saying, well, coach told me not to get in. So technically, he could have had another touchdown. I really like the goal line. He's also going to get some catches. Plus, his matchup, who he's playing, is Atlanta. They're the worst run defense in the league, which I guess Chip Kelly didn't know that going into the game, especially with DeMarco Murray. But that's, I guess, a story in itself. So I really like Rashad Jennings this week with that matchup.
So here's my thoughts on Jennings. Last week, I didn't like him. You talked about how he was going to get so many catches. He didn't have a single catch last week. You talked about him getting work in the red zone. He did get some work in the red zone last week. He scored a touchdown. I think, though, as the season wears on, Andre Williams is going to get a lot of goal line touches also. Rashad Jennings is far too touchdown dependent for my liking. Shane Vereen played just about as much as Rashad Jennings did, so I am still very leery of that entire New York Giants backfield. There's just three guys that are all playing, and I don't really know whose role is what at this point. So I'm staying away from all three of them.
All right, moving on. We're going to go to wide receivers. So, Trent, give us your wide receiver top pick of the week.
So my top wide receiver this week, how about Terrence Williams in Dallas? He's the guy for the next, who knows, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. We've heard it all. No one really knows how long Dez Bryant is out for, but however long that winds up being, Terrence Williams is the Cowboys' top receiver. He's going to be the X guy in that offense. So I love Terrence Williams right now. I don't see any reason to not go after him. I know you've had concerns about him in the past, Jeremy, but now with Dez Bryant sideline, I don't see how you could be concerned about him.
Yeah, I'd love to disagree, but I can't. I just think he's and Romo looked good. He was spreading the ball around. I mean, think about it. Terrence Williams should have had a better game. He had 2 big drops. That's not going to happen again. I mean, typically that doesn't happen again unless you're what was the dude? The old Browns with Derek Anderson. Braylon Edwards. Unless you're Braylon Edwards. But anyway, I like the Terrence Williams pick. I think he's an excellent FanDuel pick. And honestly, he's going to be worth – I think he's going to end up being a pretty solid wide receiver because it's looking like Dez is going to be out up to 12 weeks now.
Yeah. I mean, his season-long value may have risen the most of any player in the league this week. So,
also, and if Dez is out 12 weeks, that's coming back for playoff time. Monitor that situation as the season goes on and try to make a trade because then you can just stash him if you're 4-0 and you got guys to give.
So, Jeremy, my first wide receiver is a guy who saw his value rise because of injury. I think the same can be said for your top wide receiver.
Yeah, this one could arguably be a bigger rise, but equivalent at the least. I'm going with Dante Moncrief. T.Y. is out. Even with T.Y. there, Moncrief saw 11 targets last week. He had 6 for, I think, 60-something and a touchdown.
46 and a touchdown. 6 for 46
and a touchdown. 6 for 46 and a touchdown. So, Luck obviously showed his trust in him even before T.Y.'s gone. Andre Johnson looked awful. Dwayne Allen and Coby Fleener didn't do anything. I would go as far as to say that Moncrief is going to be the guy there.
Yeah, I mean, the Colts had a really weird game week 1 against the Bills.
It was a weird week.
They threw the heck out of the ball, but only come up with 14 points. I mean, T.Y. had 14 targets. Moncrief had 11. Johnson had 10. Although, like you said, Johnson was terrible. And really the only reason I think Johnson has value left is because of the Hilton injury. That's how bad that week 1 game was. Moncrief has flown by him on the fantasy radar and probably the team's depth chart as well at this point. So I'm going to agree with your first wide receiver pick as well. I like Moncrief.
Let's do a little side tangent real quick. Can we talk about how weird week 1 is? A.J. Green had single-digit points. Peyton Manning had 5 points. What is some of this? DeMarco Murray
had 20 total yards. He didn't wind up scoring 2 touchdowns, but he had 9 yards rushing and 11 yards receiving.
Calvin Johnson had 3 points. It was a weird week, and
Very
Bishop
strange.
Sankey went off of
22 points for Bishop Sankey.
There's no reason to freak out yet, but it was a very weird week.
Very weird. I definitely agree. But let's go ahead and keep moving with the podcast. My second wide receiver, I picked him last week. He dropped the 20 spot last week. Now, obviously, it's going to be hard to score 20 points every week, but I really like Jarvis Landry. I know you do as well, Jeremy. This guy, he looks like the player he reminds me of is probably a Julian Edelman, a Wes Welker type. He's not the biggest guy. He's not going to make these spectacular Odell Beckham catches, but he's going to reception the hell out of you. He might wind up getting 110 catches this year. So until he really breaks through, I think this is a guy that's eventually going to get to the level where we can't pick him anymore because he's not going to be an apocalypse-type player in a few weeks. But for now, he still is, so I like Jarvis Landry.
Oh yeah, Jarvis Landry. Honestly, probably next week he'll be off limits because he's the number one receiver in what we think is going to be a high-powered offense, but I
What
guess
you think is going to be a
no,
high-powered
absolutely
offense.
not. Tons of people do. But anyway, so Jarvis is going to be a stud, and I mean, basically take advantage of him while his FanDuel and DraftKings money is inexpensive.
So, Jeremy, who's going to be your second wide receiver this week?
Well, Trent, unlike you, I'm going to reach, and I'm going to reach deep, deep into the fantasy bag. I'm going with Brandon Coleman. He had a touchdown last week against the Cardinals. I mean, Cooks got shut down, which I get, but Breeze has no one to throw to. I mean, absolutely
The corpse of
no
Marcus
one.
Colston.
Yeah, Colston's barely walking around. Brandon Coleman is a guy who's young, and they've seen talent. He had 4 for 40 something and a touchdown, I believe. I think he has a good chance to be a solid receiver this week. So I like him. I think Cooks bounces back as well. But you got to also think that Arizona's secondary is arguably the best in the league. So for him to put up some numbers against them is pretty impressive to me.
When you told me you were picking Brandon Coleman as your second wide receiver, I believe my exact response was, I don't even know who that is.
Yeah, that was exact.
So I get major concerns about picking a guy that I had never heard of half an hour ago.
Here's the kicker, my friend. They're playing the Buccaneers.
As good of a point as that is, I just that's a real reach to me.
What is the name of this show? The Fantasy Apocalypse.
I mean,
I'm reaching, boys. I'm trying to help you guys out.
That is a real apocalyptic pick. You'll be able to get him dirt cheap on FanDuel.
Well, let's put it this way. For example, there was a guy in our league who shall remain nameless who lost Des Bryant, Andre Ellington, and Deshaun Jackson. He had them all on the same team. A guy like Brandon Coleman is someone who could possibly be beneficial for his team.
That's true. I just I'm out until I see a few more weeks of this kid.
Brandon Coleman will outscore Calvin Johnson and A.J. Green again.
And that's why we do the show, to hear Jeremy say dumb things like that.
And the Dolphins will win the Super Bowl. All right, moving on. Trent, give us your tight end pick.
So my tight end pick, guy out of Minnesota, Kyle Rudolph. He had 5 catches for 53 yards last night, 7 targets, tied for Mike Wallace for the most on the Vikings. As bad as Teddy Bridgewater looked last night, and he looked bad. The fact is that the Vikings this week get to play the Detroit Lions, who gave up 404 yards to Phillip Rivers last week. So clearly they have issues on their secondary. They got burned by Stevie Johnson last week. So I'm definitely picking. I thought about picking Mike Wallace as well, but for the sake of this show, I'm picking Kyle Rudolph.
I don't like Rudolph solely for the fact that he throws up a goose egg like it's Easter Sunday way too often. But I mean, I guess he could have a good game. I don't know. It's risky. I just don't see him getting in the end zone. But I also didn't see Nelson Agholor getting 1 point. So what do I know?
So Jeremy, who's going to be your last player this week? Who's your tight end?
I'm going with the guy that really impressed me last week, Ladarius Green. He's probably on most of your guys' free agency wire, so pick him up if you can, especially if you're having tight end trouble. I guess in the season, Antonio Gates is coming back, so that'll provide an issue. However, for this week, I love the matchup. The Chargers defense is awful. They're playing the Bengals, who just routed the Raiders last week. They're going to be playing from behind again. Odds are that Ladarius Green will be the beneficiary of a lot of targets in an offense that's probably going to throw 50 times.
Yeah, I just talked about it. Phillip Rivers threw for 400 yards last week. Jeremy's right, though. This is absolutely a very short lifespan as far as Ladarius Green's fantasy value. Antonio Gates will be back after week 4. So if you're going to use Ladarius Green, now's the time to do it. Maybe you have an injury at tight end, or maybe you're in a situation like me where you have Delaney Walker, who's probably going to play, but not 100%. Maybe this is a guy you pick up as a free agent just in case in your season-long leagues. As far as 1-week leagues, he's going to be pretty cheap. So yeah, I don't really have anything bad to say about the Ladarius Green pick. I think it's a pretty safe play.
I appreciate that, Trent. Well, that wraps it up for all of our picks today. Some other notable mentions: Flacco. He's got a pretty juicy matchup, and I think he bounces back.
Yeah, they're going up against the Raiders, who Andy Dalton looked like a superstar against last week.
Yeah, so he'd be a good one. Bradford, I think they're going to fine-tune and practice. And I mean,
are you sure you want to go down that road again?
I don't care if Bradford gets single-digit fantasy points. If he throws over 50 times, I count that a win. C.J. Spiller could be back. Probably will be back.
But, dude, apparently Mark Ingram learned how to catch. He had 8 catches for 98 yards last week, so...
You know how much Peyton loves those Spiller-type players. He's going to use them.
We'll see.
Look how he used Pierre Thomas last year. He's going to use Spiller. Spiller's way more versatile than Pierre Thomas. Anyway, there's some other start, like LeGarrette Blount, for example. He's coming back. He's a starting running back. I don't like his matchup this week, but keep an eye on him. Bishop freaking Sankey. I don't recommend starting him yet, but just keep an eye on him. Do you have any?
Yeah, like I was talking about a minute ago, Mike Wallace. You could even throw in Charles Johnson as well, just because they're playing the Lions. They could easily. I mean, Teddy Bridgewater could throw for 300 yards this week just because of how bad that Lions defense is. So I think any part of the Vikings offense you can get a hold of this week, you should do. I mean, obviously Adrian Peterson's going to be expensive, but as far as the receiving targets, I like any of the top 3 guys there.
Sounds like a plan. Well, Trent, that's, I guess, all for this week. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I can't wait to be 2-0 after this week. I'll beat you again. I'm on my way to our $100 as we bet it last week on the show.
Also, what we do is honorary win gets first pick, so they naturally have the advantage. So whenever I get that back, I'm probably going to go on like a 10-0 run. So that's my thoughts. Anyway, guys, we appreciate you. Oh, again, shout out to Aaron Bennett for doing our theme song. We really appreciate that. We appreciate our listeners. Tell your friends, and we seem to get a lot of texts and calls throughout the week about fantasy advice. Not really anything on the Facebook page, but
Yeah, for sure, guys. Make comments on the YouTube. Make comments on the Facebook thread where we tag people. If you're not friends with us, I don't know how many out there that are listening that maybe aren't friends of ours. Add me and Jeremy on Facebook. We'll start tagging you guys if you want. But give us questions. We'll gladly answer questions on air if you leave a Facebook comment or a YouTube comment.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next week.